Just 1 second for the slide. Just need to, so many windows open.
And Malgorzata, I would suggest let's keep off the slides because I'd like to be able to see the audience, or at least my slides, because it's available to everyone. And my plan is to talk to folks for about 15, 20 minutes and then engage in a discussion, much of which follows what Klaus just spoke about. I think it's a nice continuation, if you will.
That's fine. Thank you very much. Just a short introduction and asking people to join a slide as well, because we will gathering questions there. So if you could join Slido. Absolutely. And just a few words about you, Ed. So Dr. Ed Hoffman is the co-author of the SMART mission, NASA's lessons for managing knowledge, people, and projects. He was the founding director, NASA Academy for Program, Project, and Engineering Leadership, and the first NASA Chief Knowledge Officer. Welcome, Ed.
Wonderful to be here. Thank you very much.
So the floor is yours now, and I'm stopping sharing.
All right. So I see the names here, and I see many friends for a long time, and obviously some new people. What I'm going to suggest is I did prepare slides, and the team here has them, and they'll make them available. I think my message really is one that's very much centered that we can accomplish anything. What I mean we, I mean humans, I mean people. If we're very clear on the mission, if we're very clear on the strategy, and if we're very comfortable with the ability to change and to acknowledge we individually don't have all the answers. My experience at NASA was really a kind of midpoint. I worked with the senior leadership. I worked under 5 NASA administrators in my time. I reported to the NASA chief engineer. So I was dealing with a lot of the executives, the senior managers who were trying to go to a destination. And ultimately, I represented the program project management practitioners and the engineers. And the different vantage points based on where you are in a relationship, how you see things differently. But what I learned, I believe, early at NASA, and I think it's true of project-based organizations that are mission-driven. They are usually composed of people like yourselves, I predict, that are very passionate, very strong, sometimes very strong-headed, very committed to an action, very committed to do things right. And then the question is, how do you get all of us together to be able to make smart, fast, effective decisions without getting to the point where we don't want to work with each other? And this is a place, I always said to NASA, give me 20 people from NASA, and we can really do anything for the good or for the bad of humanity, right? You can do anything. So I am inherently a believer in the capacity of the most important technology, the most important tool, the most important technology that's there. It is the brains of people who decide to come together to make things happen. So what I want to do is for about 15 minutes, 20 minutes, I will make out about 5 key points that my experience says really leads to overall success for the strategy of a country or for an organization or a project, but also for how project teams come together and how they're successful. And then what I'd like to do is maybe get some rebuttal, some questions, some interaction. And I think in many ways, I was listening to Klaus talk, it's a very similar message. So maybe there's a continuity there in terms of moving forward. Let me start this. When I was talking to the team here and Oliver, one of the suggestions was, can you take us back to the year 2000? And NASA was going through major changes. It had to go through changes. And the title of this is Out of the Crisis. You know, how NASA leveraged the notion of a smart mission to be successful. It's something that every organization, really country, deals with. You are in a place where you need to go in a new direction. And the new direction there was NASA legacy organization. Think about the 1990s. It was, you know, in the 60s, it had landed a human on the moon, returned safely. The population, the people had a adoration to a certain extent of NASA. Yet there was a major problem in the 90s and 2000. One was fundamentally, where do you go after the moon? Where do you go? How do you keep things engaged? The other thing is, anybody in the aerospace business, is the business model was very difficult. You see, Apollo was a very unusual program, one that I don't know if you'll ever see again. It was basically a program that was so important for different reasons that it had more funding and more money than they needed. I tell project managers, you will probably never live to experience a situation where you have more resources. It was a time where the organization, basically the entire organization, was focused on Apollo. You don't have to worry about silos as much when you're all working on the same thing. You basically could get support from industry, from academia, from international partners, because this was so important. And after Apollo, you go from a time of one major program that captured everyone's support and imagination and a huge budget and tremendous resources, to a world that I think all of you live in, where you have dozens or hundreds of projects, to a certain extent having to compete with each other for resources, and where you have to work across different lines of people who are probably working on different things. How does this take place? And in 2000, the other thing that was going on was that the cost of rocket launches, the cost of launch, was exorbitant. To send off a rocket, to send off a shuttle, to send off something to go into space was incredibly expensive. It was very long duration. It took a long time to work the program. The emphasis was on performance above all. That means cost, dollars sacrificed, schedule would sacrifice. It was a model that really goes against what we talk about today when you think about better, faster, cheaper, agile, the need for low costs. So NASA had a fundamental issue, is that what made them successful and great was a framework that did not work, would not continue to work. It was just too expensive. There was a young upstart, you may recognize the name of Elon Musk about the time, who said, you folks at NASA, and he also added Boeing and Lockheed and others, you're too old, you're slow, you're too expensive. I can do launches at a fraction of the cost. I can do things different. I can change the process. So this is the time frame that we were talking about in terms of, and this was the crisis, this was the issue. How do you change? And about that point, I was at that point the director of NASA's Academy. NASA, after the Challenger space shuttle disaster, for a variety of reasons, put me into a position of creating an academy to promote more effective program project management, development, training, workshops, competency frameworks, certification, to build up the project capability to be successful. And about that time, and we're talking around 2000, I was in this position, and NASA had just come off of a series of painful failures. NASA was sending a lot of robotic missions to Mars. We had 3 straight ones that failed fairly painfully. And all of this, you can research and read the cases. And what we were trying to do with Mars is do it better, faster, cheaper, if you will, do it agile. And we were having inconsistency, which is something that drives organizations crazy about projects, inconsistent performance. And after the 3rd one, which was particularly painful, I got a call from The administrator of NASA at the time was a very passionate, very smart, very intense leader called Dan Golden. His secretary was a friend. She called me and said, Ed, Dan wants to fly with you down to the education center, which is located about 30 minutes outside of Washington. He wants you on the plane with him. And then I found out from others, I was going to be the only person with the NASA executive, the NASA CEO on that flight. Totally unusual. Whenever you have the senior executive of an organization going someplace, everyone populates, everyone gets on the plane. They want to talk, they want to sell ideas. In this case, it was completely empty with the exception of me. And I know that was because Dan was furious. And I know that no one wanted to be on that 20 minutes of the 30 minutes flights. It was totally quiet. And then I saw Dan, when he was upset, he would point his finger at you, at a person. You pointing to me. I thought, well, that's an interesting reaction from the person who runs your organization. And I didn't know what to say. And he says, do you want to know why? You know what? And he said, I hold you responsible to listen. And he said something that at the point really stunned me, but it was very much kind of where we're going in terms of what we're talking about today, in my view. And he said, you know, you misled the leadership. You led us to believe that we had a project workforce that was capable, that had all the tools they need, that knew how to work together. He said, we have great training programs. We have well-certified individuals. We have people who know what it takes to lead a project, but they didn't know how to work in a team. They didn't know issues around collaboration. They didn't know how to adjust when things need to be communicated, that things aren't working. We didn't have a way of capturing the knowledge we had for what worked and what didn't. We kind of went forward with the notion that we have individual expertise and that hopefully these people would figure out how to work effectively together in a team. And basically what he said is, you didn't do anything to build team capability. You didn't do anything to build the capability in terms of knowledge, how it gets identified, how it gets shared. One of the important things that Klaus said earlier previously was, if you want to be an effective manager, be able to anticipate where things are going. That's what Dan was telling me. We didn't do that. And he basically said, you have 2 months to come up with a way of developing team capability, knowledge promoted across the organization, so that in addition to having capable individuals who are competent and certified, we have people who know how to work together on a mission. That is the starting point where I realized, you know, it's more than having people who know the capabilities of a project management methodology. It's about having an organization and a team that could work collaboratively together. So let me go with that as a starting point and get into a few points, and then I'll see what thoughts you have and maybe comment further. One of the things, if you work at NASA, and I sent this one around NASA because I was asked to talk about that transition from 2000 and really what's even taking place today, which is a very different organization. You'll hear at NASA people say, you come for the mission, you come for the projects, but you stay for the people. And it's one of the things that makes it easier to change when you have to change and go in new directions in a situation. It's an acknowledgement of a culture that values both the work, the methodology, the technical challenges, as well as a community of people that make decisions and collaborate together. So a few things in terms of out of the crisis, the ability to adapt, the ability to change, the ability to be successful in a VUCA kind of environment, the ability to promote successful projects that are adaptive and agile. The first point that I would say is, and I mentioned this as the notion of a smart mission. A smart mission is one where the mission is important to us. It's something that we as a team, as an organization, as a country, as a world feels this is so important. We have to get it right. So doing these series of talks, it's for the important cause of Ukraine. It's also for learning. There's a clarity of why this is important, so this has to be successful. A smart mission, therefore, understands that intangibles increasingly drive performance. I was speaking to my friend Larry Suda last week. If you look, and he has a lot of interesting data and slides, if you look at the most successful projects, if you look at the most successful and the wealthiest organizations, they typically have a large amount of intangibles. Think of an intangible as something hard to measure, but they're essential. It's the ability to collaborate. It's the ability to partner and negotiate. It's the ability to have trust in the people that you're working with. It's the ability to innovate. All these are intangibles. They're essential, but they're uncomfortable for traditional management because they're hard to measure. And what are specifically the intangibles that make a difference? Number one, I would say, is knowledge. The most successful projects, the most successful organizations, they have a know-how for what it takes to sustain performance, to be successful. At NASA, as you got into the 90s, people started recognizing the way we were successful going to the moon will no longer work. We maybe would like to keep doing things the way we were successful. We can't. We have to change. So one important part of knowledge is working in a team, in an organization that says, we got to do things different. It may short-term be safer it's lower risk in the short term not to change things. But fairly quickly in the long term, we need to find new ways and new approaches to deal with new problems. And knowledge is really the ability to develop the new knowledge you need. You can get that from buying consultants. You can get that from technology. You can get them from learning and development programs. You can get them from what we're doing right now, sharing expertise and ideas. It's the ability to retain and keep and be able to find the expertise and the knowledge you have. I have friends like myself who are getting older. When they work in an organization, they have a lot of know-how and wisdom. You don't want a new generation to always have to find new things that matter. So how did we go to the moon? Can we find that right now? And the third aspect of effective teams and organizations is they know how to share this kind of knowledge. So knowledge is one of the things that is essential for a team. Second, learning. Learn is basically essential if you're living in a world of change. And that's what VUCA is. In a world that is stable, which is the world I grew up with. I started working in the 80s. Slow change, things didn't change that much. Learning was much less value then, because you got to a point of excellence and you can keep doing the same thing for the rest of your career. You need to change. We're in a totally different environment. And learning is different than knowledge. Knowledge is the outcome, the ability to solve issues, the ability to adapt, the ability to solve the problems you're dealing with. Learning is the ability to continuously change and see what's going on and to adapt to it. It's a dynamic kind of component. The third intangible I mentioned is the importance of story. The best leaders, the best project managers, the best systems engineers, they are good storytellers, because what a story does is a story gives context for, go back to 2000, why do we need to change at NASA? We've been to the moon, we're great, we're wonderful. A story basically indicates these are the successes, these are the failures, and based on that, we understand the context for maybe we need to alter the direction for the mission, for the direction, for the strategy, which drives everything. The power of story also is that it balances the logical, the rational, with the emotional, and humans are driven by emotions, right? Before people went to the moon, there were storytellers and artists kind of creating a desire to go there. So we need to think about the stories we're telling if we're thinking about climate as a major issue, if we're thinking about coming together for this in Ukraine. The story drives kind of that motivation, that purpose. The fourth intangible is culture. There are cultures that make it hard to learn. And I'll say very quickly, the most important factor for a culture of success is one that is fearless. Amy Edmondson talks about this. It's an environment where I'm part of our team, I see there's about 100 people here. I can say something to you. If and when I make a mistake or if I offend someone, you will tell me, hey, Ed, you know, that really, we understand what you're trying to say, but I'm still part of the team. If people are working in an environment where they're afraid to say the truth, to say that things have changed, to say the strategy is no longer working, then you'll have a silent organization and team, and mistakes and failures will come up a little bit further down the line. So a team culture of openness, of inclusion, of respect allows the wisdom of minds and ideas to move forward. The fifth of six is teaming. We work together in terms of teams. All project work is about teams. And it goes beyond having the technical expertise or the project methodological expertise. Those are essential, they're important. But there's how do we work together? And most importantly, do we work together in a spirit of trust and respect and openness? Teams that have that are able to adapt, change, respond, be honest about where they're going. And teams that lack that will do the mechanics right, but will often get into trouble because the trust isn't allowing honest use of capability. And finally, the sixth intangible to me is global collaboration. And it's the importance of the ability to work together with others, to break down silos and to leverage the expertise and different ideas with people with different backgrounds, with different areas, lawyers with budget people with design engineers with project managers, different roles going towards that mission, going towards that strategy that have to collaborate. And it's more of a great opportunity today, but it's also a challenge in that it's a global collaboration. It's a collaboration of different languages, of different ideas, of different strategies. And I can give many, many examples, and I think you've heard many of them, but the successful teams, I'll say in a nutshell, and then I want to leave a little bit of time for the questions. Successful projects, successful organizations, they get out of the crisis, they change, they adapt because of the fact that they can access knowledge and expertise. They value knowledgeable people. They are constantly learning. They tell stories about why what we're doing is so important. They value the importance of team, social connection, and they, fundamentally focus on these issues effectively. They have a culture of openness. The second factor that I wanted to mention, this one a little quicker, it goes back to what John Kay and Mervyn King describe as radical uncertainty. Be very quick on this because to a certain extent, this is what I heard partly Klaus talking about. We don't know what the future is. We don't know what tomorrow is. We don't know if the skills of current project management will all be the things that lead to success tomorrow. And this notion of radical uncertainty is even different from the notion of risk. Risk is really the notion that you could set probabilities. We know enough that we can define the problem, we can articulate it, and we can come up with probabilities for the likelihood of success. Radical uncertainty goes past that. Radical uncertainty means we don't know. We don't really know what the problem is. We don't know what the right problem statement is. And so the success today doesn't guarantee the success that tomorrow, but what we can do is we know that there's going to be issues around climate. We know that there's going to be issues around viruses and fungi and things like that. So we don't know when or how, but we develop capabilities in those areas to be smarter. So we start sensing more. So we iterate and understanding what the problem is. We test things, we test technology so they're able to do what we need to do in the future. But this concept of radical uncertainty is very jarring for people in a management role, because it's basically saying we don't know what the answer is. And an example of how to deal with that is a number of years ago with PMI, I was at Siemens headquarters, I believe, in Munich. And it was a beautiful facility. It was a building that had beautiful art and walking paths and gardens and water flowing. It was a wonderful place to walk around and talk. And I was told that the president and CEO of Siemens at the time, I believe Joe Kaiser, at the unveiling of the new building, said, our new headquarters is a place where encounters occur, including encounters with art. And this is the notion of success happens by people talking together. Again, what we're doing right now. Serendipitous encounters is vital for innovation, for finding solutions in uncertain times. Humans come together and they react off of each other, they motivate each other, and we need to create spaces and take time. This goes again against a lot of organizations. They don't like to create time that isn't allocated to something tangible. But in an intangible age, an uncertain age, we're going to have more time for thinking, talking, and coming up with new ideas. Third point is a smart mission is a balance between technology, digital, and people. I hear a lot of discussions about what's more important, people or digital. There's absolutely no need to separate these things out. Humans rely on AI, they rely on technology, they rely on data science and analytics to help our decision-making, to improve us. And at the end of the day, it's up to how people communicate, collaborate, and use that data. You've all seen examples where data has been used. The data has been accurate, but organizations decided to misread the data. You've all seen the reality where an organization gets data saying we need to go in this direction, but the people there for a variety of reasons don't want to see it. It's a balance we're in between leveraging the expertise, the knowledge, the values, the listening, the voice of our people, the different diverse people we have, leveraging it with the technology and the data that we have. And it has to be both. It can't be one or the other. And there are many examples, again, in cases I think you've heard just in the sessions here. The fourth thing, I've mentioned this already, a smart mission always happens at the team level. Knowledge is not anymore about the individual. There was a day and age where there were individuals, there were brilliant people who had all the knowledge and all the insight. Those days are over. No one person can explain how things in an organization completely happen. And so success really starts and it happens at the team level. It's about experimentation. It's about the ability to adapt. It's about innovation. It's about understanding the strategy and the mission. It's about understanding how I contribute to that larger mission. And it's about having an environment where humans can socially work effectively together and leverage the technology and the data. But if we forget about the team, we forget about little things. I'll give you a very quick example of this. One of the things I started as a chief knowledge officer at NASA was a community. Most work today, 80 to 90% of NASA projects are international partnerships. 90% of the work is done through industry. So it's an unusual kind of model. And one of the things that we started talking about is, doesn't it make sense for NASA to get together with its international partners so that we collaborate, we can sense better, again, what Klaus was talking about, we can see what's happening, we can anticipate the future, and we can collaborate more effectively. So we started a thing called the International Project Management Community, the International Knowledge Community, and we had many of the partners as part of that. One of the longstanding partners in terms of working with NASA has been JAXA, which is the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency, a longtime partner. I happened to be doing a trip at this point to South Korea. South Korea has also a space agency we're working with called CARI. I had to go out there for some meetings. A longtime friend and advisor of mine, Jim Zimmerman. Jim worked in international relations for a large part of his career. He was centered in Europe. And he said, Ed, I hear you going to Seoul. I said, yes. He said, are you going to stop off in Tokyo? I said, no, I'm only going to be out in South Korea for a few days. Not going to go. He said, you should stop off. And I said, okay, Jim, tell me what's the need? He said, you work very closely with Japanese Space Exploration Agency, JAXA. The head of it, if you basically stop off, you should stop off, have lunch or have a quick meeting. It shows honor, it shows respect. And then go on to Seoul. If you go there directly, they'll just see it as a sign of, just a U.S. person who doesn't know any better, but you should stop off. Now, this was an issue because this was going to increase the cost of the travel. I know people in NASA would say, okay, this is a boondoggle stopping off at Tokyo, we're doing it. But I listened to Jim and I stopped off. I got in late that previous night. The next morning I got together, went to JAXA headquarters and met with the head of engineering and projects. And we talked for a little bit while. And then he said, did you just come here just to meet with me, just to visit? I said, yes. I said, this is working with you and Japan has been a long time partnership. We value it a lot. So I wanted to stop off and just say hello and engage with you. And he stopped and he looked and he said, this is a great honor. This means a lot to me that you would just take time just to stop off on your travel to Seoul. And he turned to his deputy and he said, that this is very important to me. He said, we always need to support Ed and the mission that you're working on in terms of this international project management community. And he turned to me and said, JAXA is going to be strongly supporting what we're doing here. Short story, but why do I tell you that? There's all kinds of reasons logically not to take time to build a team, not to get together, not to have dinner, not to drink together, not to show respect. There's all kinds of financial reasons not to do these things. And yet we're humans. Humans value the relationship and the connection. And that really added a lot, that little stopover. And it cost a little bit of money, it cost a little bit of time, but the value of that. When you're on a team, we look for things that I think show this kind of value. The final thing that I would say, and then let me hear what questions or thoughts you have for changing. When NASA had to change in the 90s, one of the advantages NASA had is it had wonderful people. It had wonderful partners from industry. It had wonderful partners from the international community. It has many connections in academia. In other words, it had a lot of smart people. And NASA in general has always been good at collectively pulling together intelligence. It has a data science community. It has data analytics and AI and 3D printing, but it has partners that they come together and talk to. And I think the success of project management of organizations, of societies, is typically being able to rely on the fact that we trust in our people, in our team, that we have people who are motivated, who are dedicated, who have studied, who are educated, who have expertise, who have certification. And collectively, if we respect each other, if we ask questions to each other, if we are willing to disagree with each other and argue with each other, then we can talk and anticipate certainly the risks. We can understand the radical uncertainty together, and we can start promoting decisions to be effective and to adapt and to address. It happens in all different kinds of organizations. When you go to your favorite restaurant, I think your people at that restaurant, they understand what you're looking for. They treat you on a personal level, and there's a sense of a collective thing happening here. So let me stop right now. I think people who know me for a long time, I think I'm saying what I've been saying for a long time. Project management, I always get in danger of this because project management is one of the critical skills for society, and it requires a lot of capability. So project methodology is vital. Risk management is vital. The ability to adapt and be educated like a golfer. You have to know all these things, but it's not enough. Nowadays, it's also about leadership. It's about communications. It's about listening to young people who are new with new ideas. It's also about listening to experienced, mature people with different vantage points. And it's collectively taking these ideas, sometimes in an iterative passage, and being clear of what the direction is we're going. And if we're going in the right direction, then you keep going there, you do more of things. If you're getting a little bit off, you don't panic and yell, but you kind of adjust it. And again, what I learned from NASA, when you have smart people, those people are smart, when you respect that, when they're international, when they're industry, when they have different perspectives, if you value learning and learning basically means I recognize I may be ignorant right now, which is hard because we've all been raised to, we have to be smart. And once you think you have all the answers, it's hard to stay successful. So perhaps you have an idea of what I'm saying. Let me open it up to comments or thoughts or disagreements or anything on that. But to me, that's how you get out of a crisis, and that's how you stay successful. You trust, you develop, you learn, you iterate, you disagree, you argue, you're comfortable in your ignorance, and you say, this is important, this mission is important, we're going to come together and do it right.
I think we have a few questions. If you would like me to read them. Okay,
absolutely.
So I would ask with the last one. So how did NASA ensure that all team members were aligned with the new mission-focused philosophy, particularly those who may have been resistant to change?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Look, when the space shuttle program ended, it was after 30 years. I was there the day of the last launch, and I saw engineers, technicians, literally tearing up. Right? And I was on the lunch line at once, and I turned and I said, "Oh, this is really a tough day." I said, "Yeah, this is my life. I've done this for 30 years. There's no other jobs for what I do in terms of shuttles." I said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "Well, make sure this is successful to the end. We're always locked to that, and then I'm going to go out to probably to the Portland area and look for different things. But it'll never be like this." So I tell that story because I always remember humans are involved in everything we do, and sometimes I think I hear so we got to change. You got to let go, which is true. But I also think you have to understand where people have been. People have spent 10, 20, 30 years doing something a certain way. We have to acknowledge that, understand, okay, where do we go from here? And that's where I think strategy is important. I think it's helpful if you can get a strategy that anticipates how we're going to help people change. So understanding the human reaction. The second thing that NASA tends to do very well is they put a lot of funding into learning and development. Now, I'm a learning and development guy. So, you're going to say, okay, this is, the bartender telling you the value of, liquor. But I got to tell you, one of the things I saw at NASA is when they have problems and they change, they put into their learning cycle, they turn into their training courses, why these changes are happening. And you're having a large part of the workforce every year going through these training courses, and they're aligned. There's a view there. The leadership will show up at those courses talking about why we need to change, the direction we're going. And there's a smoothness based on the fact that the organization starts changing because they start learning in new ways. One of the things that happens in that place is you bring in different people. When NASA was going through the better, faster, cheaper area, or I guess the agile area 20 years ago, we started bringing in people from automotive. We brought in people from different industries who had experience doing it. And that's people would listen and they would argue. I remember we had a session from a Hollywood TV producer. What does that have to do with aerospace? But, people thought that was sexy. It was cool. It was a famous TV program. And when he told his story about how they have to do things faster and cheaper, it resonated with that whole audience that says, okay, it's not just NASA dealing with these things, it's people from the TV and movie industry, and you're getting different examples. There was a lot of conversations. One of the things that takes place is that I mentioned serendipitous encounters. People at NASA, they tend to come together in different spaces or places. It can be training courses, it could be knowledge forums. They have a lot of, I forget what they call it, but they'll have timeframes where the NASA leadership will just meet with the community, and 90% of those questions are, why are we changing? Where are we going? And so I'm just a big believer is you have to respect people. People are smart. The greatest technology is between our ears. People can do anything. If you listen to them, respect them, and give them a place to talk a little bit, then they will solve things. I'll give you one quick example also of that. One of the big issues I got pulled into maybe 15 years ago was orbital debris. There's an engineering word for that, but basically there's been enough space launches that we've kind of polluted low Earth orbit, so that if you're a spacecraft or a satellite, one of the biggest dangers you have is being hit by something going at tremendous speeds that will put a hole into your system. That's why the space station always has to move, right, and adjust. So I got asked one day, I said, you got to start teaching things around destructive engineering. I think that was the term. I'm a psychology guy, and I said, we want to teach our people destructive engineering. He said, Ed, there's orbital, there's pollution in space. How do you bring it down? How do you destroy it so it's safe? And at the time, there was no one really teaching it in industry. There was not any work being done by universities. There was discussions by the government agents. So what we had to do was we brought together people from NASA, from industry, from learning organizations, and we had discussions. I remember there was a room full of about 100 people. What is this? How would you deal with it? And that led a few months later to the first course. And doing that course, we got smarter later. So again, smart organizations, they trust their people, they trust their partners, they sit down, they talk, and are we going in the right direction? So you can't save time by cutting out people. That's the biggest mistake.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question. What's the best way to sell changes at the big and bureaucratic old companies?
Yeah, and big bureaucratic companies are companies that are around for a long time that succeed. So one of the things that I know is having problems, one of the things I marvel at a place like Boeing is it's been around for over 100 years. And that means that there have been different people who have had crises and problems and urgencies, and they figured out how to survive. And one of the challenges of a young company like SpaceX, which is amazing and is great, is once the first leader goes, will they figure out how to govern themselves in long duration? It's easier to adjust and adapt when you're young than as you get older, unless you practice that. And so I think in terms of a very large, successful organization that's bureaucratic, I would say select your leaders very well, train your leaders very well. They need to know that, again, what Klaus had said earlier, that we're living in a world of rapid uncertainty. We don't have the answers. Anybody who tells you they know what the future is, they are lying to you. Either that or they really don't know what they don't know. So by definition, we're in a time where we need to leverage our people. We need to talk to each other. And if there are things that are hard to understand, for example, I've heard people say, we don't know how to deal with AI. You don't want to move in too quickly because you put in resources and it's wasted. So, what I would say you do there is you get a tiger team, you get a project team, you get some people coming together, get a mixture if you can from, again, industry, from academia, and have conversations about what's the right way to deal with artificial intelligence and how do we move forward. How do we deal with the issue of climate and decarbonization? You get smart people together, and they're going to argue, they're going to disagree. But if they have the goal, if they commit to that mission, I think the mission is the driver. When you're raising children, if you love your children, you're going to do everything for them. You're going to disagree and all, but you'll figure out ways of getting there. So I think in a large organization, the advantage of a big bureaucracy is you usually have more resources. Use them for smart things. Larger organizations waste a lot of money, to me, on stupid things that people in the organizations don't want to be doing. The leadership doesn't want to be doing. The people will tell you, it does make sense. The number of times I walked around NASA and I have a project manager saying we're doing this and it's a total waste. And I'd say, why are we doing it? Well, someone started it and we can't stop it. You know, again, we got to talk to each other. So I think those are the things that there's a lot of workshops. There's a lot of, I'm a big believer in benchmarking. So I would pull into organizations from all over, you know, invite in a Google, invite in if you can, invite in a competitor. NASA would get together. One of the concerns NASA's was around when I left it about 60 years, gets into the government, it's bureaucracy. And one of the things the chief engineer at the time, Ralph Rowe, this is a couple of years before I left, so it was probably about 2015. He said, Ed, I want you to do one of those knowledge learning things. I said, okay, Ralph, you're an engineer. Can you define a little bit more clear what knowledge learning things mean? And he said, well, what we're tracking is we're starting to have a higher failure rate of launches at the time. NASA's had a couple of things, Japan's had a few things, Russia's had a few things. Musk has had, we're seeing an increase in failures. We don't understand why. Maybe it's, we're trying new things, maybe it's not a problem. But get people from academia, get people from industry, get people from NASA together. Let's talk about what's going on. So again, I think I'm saying the same thing often, but it's fundamentally the strategic advantage of humans is that humans can solve anything if they're pulled in with this is important. Let's talk about it. Let's collect our knowledge. Let's be open to doing things a different way. And let's tell the stories about what's working, what's not. The other thing that I would say as a specific example, I found the use of storytelling sessions very powerful at NASA. And we would have a failure. I mean, the Columbia Shuttle was a tremendous failure. So we told that case, we told that story, and it led sometimes to outrage, and it led to questions of why aren't we doing things differently, and led to we need to change our governance and policy, we need to change our training, and then you do it. So I'm a big believer of get people to, could be one or a few people, to share a story of why this new activity is being successful. I think, by the way, it's harder for people at work to learn from success than from failure, frankly. And the other thing is look at a recent failure or look at things that are having problems and getting a few people to talk about why, what's leading to the problems there. Tell stories.
Okay, thank you very much. And next one, from a project team's perspective, if someone says to your face, I can't stand you, we know what to do. Capability. Please discuss and shed more light on this.
I may need you to explain that. If someone says to my face, I can't stand, oh, you're talking about so the question is, how do you deal with that?
Whose question is it? You can join us and ask the question again, or maybe more explain. Because I don't have the name of the person asking the questions.
I mean, I've had one of the people who read my book said you had a lot of people yelling at you in your life. And one of the things I tell my students, most people want to be leaders or they want to be project managers. And I really tell them, do you really want that? Because if you're in that position, you're going to be yelled at. And your best friends are going to be the ones who will be yelling, because nothing goes as planned. You know, I can always tell a young project manager, inexperienced one at NASA, because they would call me a couple of weeks after they were on the project and said, this isn't going the way it's supposed to go. And I would say, what do you mean it's not? The way we were taught in the class, the books we read, this isn't the way it's happening. You know, we were promised this. We set our requirements, we got this budget, and they've already cut us 20%. I said, don't worry, they're going to cut you another 20% before you go any further. The nature of a project and the nature of society is about change and adaptability, and you use your skills to be prepared and to change and to adapt. When I had somebody yelling at me, and I had that a few times at NASA, in my head, I basically played a game saying, okay, this is someone who's very concerned for me, right? Because there were times where my mom would yell at me for dumb things they did, or my grandma would yell at me, and they were doing it out of love. So when the NASA administrator was screaming, truthfully, I was really scared because I liked my job and I didn't like the notion of losing it. But what I was able to, I guess, commit myself to is, okay, he's telling me something really important. He's telling me you got 2 months that we focused on getting the essentials of project management training right, but we ignored how we work in a team. And he was totally right. It was, when he said it, it was like, this annoys me. This guy, he's the engineer, he's an executive, and he's right. And with my background, I should have known this. And he's right. We weren't doing anything around knowledge approaches. So I just look at yelling. I had a person very early in my career. There was a woman, Mary Atkins. I always remember Mary. And I was at Goddard. I was in my 20s. And she was a big supporter of me. I was doing stuff in terms of consulting to teams, which is very unusual at that time in the 80s. I was at Goddard Space Flight Center, and Mary was always a big supporter. But when Mary was unhappy with something that I did, she was a screamer. She was one of those people. I remember she came into my office. I was in human capital, and she was yelling about something that was dumb. I don't even remember what it is. And I just listened to her. And she calmed down after about 5 minutes. And she says, "Oh, that's awful. I shouldn't be. Why am I yelling at you? I like you, and I apologize to you, and all that kind of stuff." And I told her something that I really believe. I said, "Look, Mary, I'd rather you just tell me when things are going quietly and more calm. But if the best way you can tell me I'm doing something wrong is by screaming, then I'd rather you scream, because I want to know what's going on out there. It's really important. We've had failures at NASA where spacecraft went out of orbit and people saw it, but it wasn't communicated because we were being nice. And you don't need to be nice to me if you're protecting me from something I need to say." So that's how I deal with that kind of thing. I'll give you another story of a hero I had. One of the best project leaders, program leaders at NASA was an individual named Jim Odom. And Jim was a senior leader. He took over the Hubble Space Telescope when I was going through problems, typical problems that a program that size has. And he was meeting with a representative of the congressional committee that was very, very unhappy, very angry at NASA about Hubble and the cost overruns and the delays and the problems. And this representative heard that Jim was going to be, taking over Hubble. And he met with Jim Odom, and the person said, "Jim, I am going to make your life miserable." And Jim gave the greatest answer I ever heard. Jim said, "I believe we're going to be great friends." And the political aide basically said, "Do you just hear me? I said I was going to make your life miserable. What makes you think we're going to be great friends?" And Jim said, "I understand why you're unhappy with NASA, with the cost overruns, with issues and problems, lack of communications. Our goal is the same goal, to make the Hubble Space Telescope a tremendous success for society. I'm committed to that. My team is committed to that. We're going to be communicating. And I realize your concerns are about making this successful. So I think we're going to have a wonderful relationship together." That to me is probably the greatest example of someone angry and kind of dealing with it. And a couple of weeks later, they had such a good relationship. He called, Jim and said, I really do trust you now. I'm good with NASA. Let's go back to our normal project reviews. So you can work relationships. So oftentimes the screaming person is telling you the truth. So that's, I guess, how I'm trying to look at it.
And one more question. I hope we've got 5 minutes. So one more question. What's your opinion about SpaceX by Elon Musk?
It's great. I mean, SpaceX, look, Elon's he's a character. I have a feeling I probably would not want to work with him. Because again, I'm emphasizing respect and people and collaboration. But look, he's an individual who has seen the need to change industries. Certainly in terms of space, he was right 20 years ago. He said, look, it's too costly to launch. It's too traditional. It's too slow. We can do things faster. And he backed that up. He got a very small amount of money. This is the thing that I think I was proud of NASA. I think NASA is able to adapt and innovate because it has such extensive relationships with industry and with international partners. So what happened there is Elon had a proposal how to do things cheaper. NASA gave SpaceX initially a relatively small amount of money. when it went to them, people said, you can't do anything with that. But Elon was smart. He experimented. He iteratively took a little bit of that component. He had a success. And then the next year he got significantly more money. And he kept getting more and more money until he proved himself to be the major or a major player in terms of launch. And so I admire him a great deal. I probably admire him more. I like it when people are respectful to others. I work for some leaders. The two administrators that I worked with that I had the greatest success with were the two most brutal people to work for. They practiced, they would have practiced, I think, abuse on a weekly level. I experienced that, but I knew that they were passionate about what they were doing. I knew that they were very honest about what they were doing. In my case, I knew they valued the learning and development. So I think, for me, I think you need to work with all kinds of people. And but yeah, SpaceX has been an amazing story. A lot of people have their t-shirt. So he's done a great thing. And he opened up a new narrative. He created a new story, which is, yeah, we can do that in a different way. We can do that faster. And that allows NASA and Boeing and Lockheed and Blue Origin and Branson, all these other places to step up. So it's a wonderful thing. Again, it becomes a learning lesson. And as you know, I guess I closed that, there's a lot of expertise here. I look around the room, I see Dr. Kirshner here, who was working at NASA before I got there. And Oliver, and I mentioned Larry Suda. There's a community of expertise, and we don't have the answers maybe today, but the thing that I would say I loved about NASA, and that's partly why I wrote the book, is we can do it right. But it comes from a respect for people. It comes from recognizing people who do that with us and for us. And that to me is the lesson. I was at NASA 33 years. And all those 33 years, I only had 1 year where I had a budget cut to my learning and development program. I saw. And, that says a lot, but I think that's different. A lot of organizations, it's hard to get new ways of doing things. It's and development and taking time to do things like this. So.
Okay, thank you very much. We can finish. I think that's a very good ending of your very exciting and speech. Thank you very much, Ed. We've answered all questions. On the Zoom chat. So thank you very much.
Thank you. This is what you're doing today is very important. I don't know if you want to even put in, where do we donate? How do we donate? I know it's for the UNIFIT stuff. So if you want to take a minute to share that, but what's happening today is a beautiful thing.
Thank you.